Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. The night was unusually quiet in Genoa city, a silence that felt eerie, heavy, and suffocating, as though the entire town had been holding its breath in anticipation of something catastrophic about to unfold. And it was in this tense stillness that Holden Ward's world was about to be shattered forever, for when he returned home that evening, expecting nothing more than the comforting normalcy of a late-night conversation with Claire Grace, he instead stumbled upon a nightmare that twisted reality into a gruesome spectacle. There she was, the young woman he had grown to care about deeply, sprawled across the floor of the dimly lit living room, her golden hair matted with blood, her pale face ghostly against the harsh wooden floor, and her body frighteningly still, surrounded by a dark crimson pool that spread outward like an ink blot, staining not just the carpet but Holden's soul with a fear so profound it nearly crippled him. And in that moment, as his knees buckled beneath the crushing weight of terror, he let out a strangled cry that seemed to echo endlessly against the walls of the house, a cry that carried the anguish of someone watching his entire world collapse in an instant, for Claire had always been fragile yet strong, wounded yet resilient. And now seeing her broken in such a brutal, inhuman way, Holden could barely process the horror before him, but instinct took over even as his mind screamed denial, and he rushed to her side, his trembling hands hovering before finally pressing against the wound at her abdomen, blood oozing through his fingers as he tried desperately to stop the bleeding, whispering her name over and over like a prayer, his voice cracking, his heart pounding so loud it drowned out rational thought. Yet in that haze of panic he knew this wasn't some random act, it was personal, deliberate, the mark of someone who wanted Claire silenced, someone who had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And as he fumbled for his phone to call for help, the lights above flickered ominously, as if mocking him, a reminder that danger might still be close, that the attacker who had done this could still be lurking nearby, watching with twisted satisfaction as Holden fought for Claire's life. And just when his hands began to falter from shock, Claire's eyes fluttered weakly, her lips parting as though she wanted to say something, to warn him, but the words came out in a whisper so faint he had to lean down close to hear, and even then, all he caught was a single name, a name that froze his blood colder than the sight of her wounds, because it was someone he knew, someone he trusted, someone no one would have ever suspected, and though her voice broke off before she could say more, it was enough to ignite a storm of rage and confusion inside him, for how could this person, this figure hiding behind a mask of normalcy, commit such a heinous act, and why Claire, why now, what secret was she carrying that made her such a target? Questions that spun through his mind in rapid succession as the wail of sirens grew nearer, called by his frantic 911 call, but even as the paramedics burst into the room and worked with precision to stabilize Claire, Holden's focus never wavered from that name, the identity of the mysterious attacker that Claire had struggled to reveal, and though he wanted nothing more than to climb into the ambulance with her, to stay at her side until he knew she would be safe, there was also an undeniable pull dragging him toward the truth, a need to confront the monster who had done this before they struck again, because deep down Holden sensed that this was far from over, that Claire's blood was just the beginning of a much larger war being waged in shadows, a war that had been simmering beneath the surface of Genoa city for months, and now with Claire's life hanging in the balance, Holden knew he couldn't sit idly by, he had to hunt the attacker down. But what made the revelation so haunting, so utterly devastating, was that the attacker wasn't a faceless stranger from the outside, but someone who had wormed their way into the lives of those closest to Holden and Claire, someone who had smiled, laughed, and broken bread at the same tables, hiding venom beneath a charming mask. And when the truth emerged at last, when Holden pieced together the fragments of Claire's whispered confession, the world as he knew it would never be the same, for the mysterious attacker revealed themselves not in the shadows of the night but in the cold, harsh light of betrayal. Michael Baldwin, the respected attorney whose sharp mind and steady presence had long been a pillar of Genoa city's elite, was the one who had struck Claire down, a revelation so stunning it threatened to unravel the very fabric of trust among their circle, because Michael had always walked the line between redemption and darkness, but no one believed he would cross into such brutality again, and yet here was the proof, written in Claire's blood, and Holden's fury burned hotter than ever, because now he understood, Claire had uncovered something, perhaps a buried secret or a dangerous scheme that threatened to expose Michael's carefully crafted image, and for that, she had to be silenced. But what Michael had not counted on was Holden's resolve, his unyielding determination to protect the woman he loved. And as Claire fought for her life in the sterile confines of a hospital room, Holden made a silent vow that he would tear down Michael's mask, drag him into the light, and make him pay for every drop of blood Claire had shed, even if it meant sacrificing everything he had left, because nothing mattered more than justice for her. And as the story of that night spread through the city, whispers of betrayal and violence rippling through the community, the stage was set for a showdown that would shake Genoa City to its core, with Holden standing as Claire's protector, Michael revealed as the predator in their midst, and the fragile balance of love, trust, and power collapsing beneath the weight of one shocking truth, that sometimes the deadliest enemies are not strangers at the gate, but the people we invite into our homes, our lives, and our hearts. And in the end, Holden's discovery of Claire in that pool of blood was not the end of a story but the terrifying beginning of a battle that would demand everything he had, and more, because as long as Michael Baldwin drew breath, no one in Genoa City would ever be safe again. Holden's breath came in short, ragged bursts as he stood outside Claire's hospital room, his hands still stained with her blood despite the nurse's insistence that he wash them, but he couldn't bring himself to let go of the physical reminder of what had just happened, because it was proof that he had been there when she needed him most, proof that she had fought to survive long enough to whisper the name that changed everything, and proof that Michael Baldwin was no longer the man Genoa City believed him to be but a predator hiding behind a mask of respectability. Yet Holden knew he couldn't just walk into the police station and blurt out the accusation without evidence, for Michael was too careful, too intelligent, and too skilled at manipulating the truth to ever let himself be undone by a single dying whisper. And so Holden's mind raced, drawing connections between moments he had brushed aside before. Michael's sudden interest in Claire's work at Newman Media, his too pointed questions about the projects she had been assigned. The way his smile never quite reached his eyes when Claire entered the room, as though he saw her not as a young woman trying to rebuild her life but as a threat to his own secrets. And now, in hindsight, it all made sense, but Holden needed more than intuition and a blood-soaked confession to take him down. He needed proof, undeniable and irrefutable, and the thought of digging into Michael's affairs filled him with both dread and determination. Because Holden had always respected Michael, had even considered him something of a mentor at times, but that respect had evaporated in the moment Claire gasped his name, leaving behind only rage and the desperate need to protect her at all costs. And as he leaned against the sterile white wall of the hospital corridor, his eyes never straying from the door where doctors fought to stabilize Claire, Holden remembered the look in her eyes just before they closed, the flicker of fear mixed with something else, resolve, as if even in her weakest moment she had trusted him to finish what she could not, to bring the truth into the light, and that silent request weighed on him more heavily than anything ever had before. So when Victor Newman himself arrived at the hospital, his towering presence filling the hallway with authority, Holden wasted no time in telling him everything. But Victor, ever the strategist, didn't leap to conclusions, instead narrowing his eyes in that calculating way that had both saved and destroyed lives, and he told Holden in no uncertain terms that if Michael Baldwin truly was behind this attack, then they were dealing with an enemy who would not hesitate to strike again, not just at Claire but at anyone who stood in his way. And though Holden bristled at Victor's calm, almost detached demeanor, he also recognized that the man was right. They couldn't afford reckless moves, they had to be precise, they had to be clever, because Michael would anticipate their every step. And as Victor placed a firm hand on Holden's shoulder, he said something that chilled him to the bone. If Baldwin has revealed his true nature again, then you and Claire are just the beginning of his endgame. And those words planted a seed of dread in Holden's chest, for what if this attack was not just about silencing Claire but about something bigger, something that threatened to engulf all of Genoa City in chaos. And as that possibility took root, Holden realized the road ahead would be far more dangerous than he had imagined. Because Michael wasn't just a man with secrets, he was a man with power, influence, and a mind sharp enough to twist every piece of evidence back onto his accusers. And Holden would have to match that brilliance with sheer determination, because failure was not an option, not when Claire's fragile life still hung by a thread, her heartbeat steady but faint on the monitors inside the room, a constant reminder of what was at stake. And in the long hours that followed, Holden began his Hunt in silence, replaying every conversation, every subtle glance, every suspicious moment that he had ignored before, weaving together a tapestry of deceit that painted Michael Baldwin not as the loyal friend and trusted confidant everyone believed, but as the shadowy puppeteer orchestrating a much darker scheme. And the more Holden uncovered, the clearer it became that Claire's attack was meant to send a message, a warning to anyone who dared to dig too deep, and yet instead of intimidating him, that warning ignited a fire in Holden's soul, pushing him to dig even deeper, to risk everything, even his own life, to ensure that Michael would be exposed, because there was no turning back now, not after Claire had bled out on his living room floor, not after she had entrusted him with her final breath. And as the days bled into nights, and nights into days, Holden's obsession grew, his every thought consumed by the need to unmask Michael, even as he sat by Claire's bedside, whispering to her unconscious form that she wasn't alone, that he would never stop fighting for her, even if she couldn't hear him, because in his heart he believed she could, and maybe, just maybe, that belief would be enough to pull her back from the brink. But what Holden didn't realize was that Michael was already one step ahead, already moving his pieces across the board, already ensuring that if Holden came too close to the truth, he too would find himself bleeding out in the dark, just another casualty in a war no one else even knew had begun. Holden barely slept in the days that followed, the echo of Claire's whisper reverberating in his mind like a haunting melody he could not silence. Every time he closed his eyes he saw her lying on the floor in that crimson pool, her body motionless, her breath faltering. And every time he opened them again he was confronted with the same sterile hospital room where machines beeped steadily, keeping her tethered to life while he felt utterly powerless. But beneath the exhaustion and the grief, there burned a relentless determination that refused to be extinguished, a need to uncover the truth and expose Michael Baldwin for the monster he was, even if the rest of Genoa City still clung to the illusion of his decency. And so Holden began to dig, quietly at first, combing through old court cases, financial records, whispered rumors that had never been proven, piecing together a portrait of a man who had once straddled the line between morality and corruption but who now seemed to have embraced the darkness completely. And the deeper Holden went, the more he saw a pattern emerge, small inconsistencies that on their own could be dismissed but together painted a chilling picture of manipulation, intimidation, and cover-ups, all of which seemed to converge around Claire's recent work at Newman Media, where she had been quietly investigating a mysterious fund transfer that had vanished into a shell company linked to a project Michael had overseen years ago, a detail that seemed trivial until Holden traced the money trail and realized it led to a hidden account used to pay off witnesses, bribe officials, and bury evidence that could have exposed Michael's involvement in crimes far darker than anyone suspected. And suddenly Claire's attack made horrifying sense. She had been too close, she had stumbled onto the truth, and Michael had done what predators always did, eliminate the threat before it could expose him. But what Michael hadn't counted on was Holden, a man with nothing to lose and everything to fight for. And so Holden began reaching out to allies, people who had no love for Michael, starting with Phyllis Summers, whose history with Baldwin was checkered with betrayals and rivalries. And though at first she was skeptical, dismissing Holden's accusations as the ramblings of a man driven mad by grief, it didn't take long before the evidence began to sway her, and together they formed a fragile alliance built on a shared goal, taking Michael down once and for all. But if Holden thought this investigation would remain hidden, he was wrong, for Michael was far too clever, far too paranoid, and within days he was already aware that Holden was digging, already sending out subtle warnings in the form of veiled threats, shadowy figures following Holden late at night, phone calls where no one spoke but the sound of heavy breathing filled the silence, and once even a bullet lodged into the wall of his apartment as a reminder that he was walking a dangerous path. But instead of retreating, Holden pushed forward, emboldened by the knowledge that if Michael was lashing out, it meant he was afraid, it meant he knew Holden was getting closer, and that fear gave Holden strength. The kind of reckless courage that came from knowing he had nothing left to lose except the woman lying unconscious in that hospital bed. But even as Holden hunted for evidence, Michael was waging a psychological war, spinning a narrative that painted Holden as unstable, whispering to the police that grief had clouded his judgment, subtly undermining his credibility at every turn. And more than once Holden found himself doubting whether anyone would believe him even if he managed to expose the truth. But those doubts always faded the moment he stepped into Claire's room, the moment he held her cold hand in his and promised her that he would never stop fighting. And one night, just as he was about to drift into an exhausted sleep beside her bed, he felt the faintest squeeze of her fingers, so slight he almost thought he imagined it, but when he looked up he saw her eyelids fluttering, her lips parting to release a weak but undeniable sound, his name, and the rush of relief that flooded him was indescribable, for Claire was fighting her way back, refusing to let the darkness take her, and with every ounce of strength she regained, Holden's determination grew, for now they weren't just fighting for justice, they were fighting together, and Claire, though fragile, was more determined than ever to finish what she had started, to expose Michael Baldwin and ensure he could never hurt anyone again. But Michael, sensing his carefully constructed empire beginning to crumble, escalated his attacks, and one evening as Holden left the hospital, he was ambushed in the parking garage, dragged into the shadows by two masked men who beat him viciously, leaving him bloodied and barely conscious with a chilling message carved into his car windshield: "Stop or she dies." And though every bone in his body screamed at him to quit, to protect Claire by walking away, Holden knew deep down that yielding to Michael would only guarantee Claire's destruction, for predators like him never stopped, never relented, and so with broken ribs and bruised skin Holden pushed himself back into the fight, refusing to bow to the terror Michael tried to instill. But the real turning point came when Claire finally woke fully, her voice weak but steady as she recounted everything she had uncovered before the attack, the files she had hidden, the conversations she had overheard, and together, she and Holden pieced together the final damning puzzle, enough to prove Michael's guilt beyond doubt. Yet as they prepared to hand the evidence over to the authorities, Michael made his boldest move yet, infiltrating the hospital under the guise of a concerned visitor, his charm disarming the nurses, his smile masking the venom beneath, and when he slipped into Claire's room, closing the door behind him, Holden felt his blood run cold, for there was the man who had caused them so much pain, standing over Claire's bed with that same calculating gleam in his eyes, and in that moment Holden knew this wasn't about evidence or trials anymore, it was about survival. It was about stopping Michael here and now before he finished what he had started. And as Holden lunged forward, the two men collided in a brutal clash of fists, fury, and desperation. The sterile hospital room transformed into a battlefield where the stakes were nothing less than life and death, and though Michael fought with the cold precision of a man who had lived in shadows for years, Holden fought with the raw, unyielding power of love, of loyalty, of the desperate need to protect Claire, and in the end, that was the force that tipped the balance, for even as Holden's body screamed with pain, even as blood dripped from his split lip and bruises blossomed across his skin, he refused to fall, refused to yield, until finally he gained the upper hand, slamming Michael against the wall and restraining him just as hospital security burst into the room. And though Michael tried to spin his usual web of lies, painting Holden as the aggressor, this time the truth was undeniable, for Claire, weak but unbroken, found the strength to speak, her voice cutting through the chaos with clarity and conviction as she named Michael Baldwin as her attacker, as the man who had nearly killed her, and though he tried to smear, tried to twist the narrative one last time, the weight of the evidence Claire and Holden had gathered crushed him, leaving him exposed, powerless, and finally, irrevocably unmasked, and as he was dragged away in handcuffs, spitting venom and threats, Holden collapsed at Claire's side, his body broken but his spirit unshaken, and in that quiet aftermath, as sirens wailed outside and whispers of the shocking revelation spread like wildfire through Genoa city, Holden realized that finding Claire in that pool of blood had been the beginning of a war he had never asked for but one he had fought with everything inside him, and though the scars would remain forever, though the nightmares would never fully fade, he knew one thing with absolute certainty, that no matter what darkness rose to threaten them, he and Claire would face it together, and they would not be defeated.